Regards, gentle listener. We're back, and our kit bag is simply bursting with dreadful goodies to share with you. It's the year 2026, which sounds even more futuristic than 2025. Still no flying car, though. But at least we finally have that long-awaited artificial intelligence threat to contend with. So, swings and roundabouts, as they say. Speaking of artificial intelligence, our humble narrator incorporates no AI in the production of nocturnal transmissions. As a matter of fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find a trace of any manner of intelligence in his doings. You've probably already noticed that. No, this show is all laboriously handcrafted the long, slow, old-fashioned way. See, told you there was a lack of intelligence. But between you and me, gentle listener, that's the way we like it. And we hope you like our first selection for the year. Let's travel just a little further into the future than we already find ourselves and meet Colin Harker's The Sin Eater. Merrick and Rosette were already waiting for me, seated at a table for three beneath a halo-like fluorescent light. Rosette was still wearing the white jumpsuit that hospital staff were required to wear, the medal representing a dove and a cross fashioned of pearl and branded with the insignia of District 24 of New Londinium glowing on her left shoulder. She must have asked for special leave from her night shift so that she could be with Merrick during our interview. It was touching that she would take the pay cut for his sake, and gratifying that she realized how serious the situation was. They had never seen me before, but they still knew who I was, or rather what I was. I wasn't wearing my full uniform, only a plain black suit, but the insignia gleaming on my shoulder, a silver sword athwart a silver hand, was unmistakably that of a court of justice officer. The sword was meant to represent justice. The hand... mercy. I wasn't sure. As I approached, the couple stood and Merrick extended a hand, a nervous smile playing on his lips. "Officer?" "That's right," I said, taking his hand and giving it a firm squeeze, my own hand still gloved in leather. "Officer Conway, at your service." I had already made my mind up that the place Merrick had chosen for our meeting was unsuitable. Too loud, too casual, too bright. It had been an amusing show of politeness to offer him the choice, but I'd never really had any intention of taking his preference seriously anyway. As they watched, visibly tense for my response, I shook my head. "Allow me to suggest another place, a little more suitable for our talk. If, of course, that's fine with the both of you." The question was a mere formality. Merrick nodded and Rosette stooped to gather up her purse and umbrella. I told Merrick that he could drive and I would direct him. As we approached my car, I held the back door open for Rosette. The gesture was courteous, but my intentions were not. I didn't want her to sit in the passenger seat beside Merrick. I wanted her beside me. It was a hot, rainy evening. The water lashed against the windshield, distorting and softening the sharp glare of streetlights and brightly lit kiosks. High above the pavilion of food stalls and pubs, I saw the distant, glittering, cathedral-like spires of Fonthill Towers. Part state church, part courthouse, part gated community for the metropolis's high-ranking politicians, and the wealthy who could afford the steep prices. I had only been in those dark towers once, 10 years ago, when I was newly christened as a Court of Justice officer. Rosette sat beside the window opposite mine, but she gazed out my window at those towers as well, before stealing a curious glance in my direction, as though I were the human extension of their glittering strength. It was natural. These civilians hated the Court of Justice, but admired our efficiency as well. We protected and punished them. Little wonder that, like children, they fawned over and feared us. But Rosette's look was different. She was curious, but also wary. She wanted to know what my intentions were for her fiancé. She wondered what sort of man I was.
"Where are we going, officer?"
Merrick asked. "Just another restaurant, but one where I can hear myself think." That came out a little more harshly than I'd meant, and I saw Rosette's eyes flicker with fear. "I mean, there is a certain protocol for where these sorts of meetings should be held. I should have scouted your choice before agreeing to it."
"Oh, it was my idea to meet at the new club,"
Rosette said.
"I'm sorry, Officer Conway."
I felt in my pocket and offered her one of those rose-flavored candies that they sell at obscene prices uptown, and which I knew from her file she had an embarrassing weakness for. This gesture was performed so naturally that it caught her off guard, and she smiled with relief and gratitude. Merrick, still driving, caught my eye in the rearview mirror. His expression was unreadable. The Delphine Bar was quiet and dark, as always. There was music, but it was subtle and sonorous, the way I liked it, like the joyous grind of machinery in a factory, or delicate insect wings vibrating in an evening field. Lamps were scarce. The tables were little islands of light in a sea of muted darkness. I led Merrick and Rosette to one such table, and once we had each ordered a drink, I said to him, "Now we'll get to your mental breakdown, but first tell me a little about yourself and your job." He hesitated, watching me idly tap my long pen against my teeth, my notebook at the ready.
"Officer Conway, how serious is this?"
I raised a brow, glancing from Merrick to Rosette. The suspense was delightful, but I suppose I had to be frank with him. "You've committed no infraction," I said. "This is a mandatory check to make certain that you're still capable of fulfilling your office. You are a member of law enforcement yourself, you know. We can't risk having a mentally unsound man on the job." He drew in a breath.
"Oh, of course, yeah, that makes sense. But where to begin?"
"Your job." I tilted my head, gave him a sharp look. "I would like to hear you describe what you do in your own words, and then tell me the events that led to your breakdown last Thursday." Merrick lit up an electronic cigarette made of cylindrical marble, blowing a plume of harmless rose-scented air in my direction. Roses again. Given Rosette's fondness for that flavor, I wonder if he smoked this scent because she enjoyed it. Or had he always smoked it, and was her own love for rose-flavored candies tied to his habit? Did they evoke him for her? I was lost in useless speculation and almost missed the first half of Merrick's reply.
"As you can imagine, it can be draining. Emotionally," he finished. "Would you like a cigarette too, Officer Conway?"
You monitor social media accounts, I know that much," I said, taking the proffered cigarette, setting the marble to my lips, and pressing the little button at its filter, watching the end flare blue and then gold with synthetic light, its sweet vapor filling my mouth and throat. "And you get rid of the pornographic and violent content, right? Seems easy enough. Just lean back, watch the images, and then void them forever.
You're an officer. You've seen horrible things, haven't you?
He said. His grey eyes met mine, waiting for an answer. Seen? Yes. I nodded.
It must be hard.
You get used to it?
See, that's what I hear from other officers like you. You get used to it.
He shook his head.
But it's different. What we do. We just have to sit there and take it. Oh, sure, we report it to you guys so that you can try and hunt the perpetrator. Sure, we take it down, but it's not the same.
What do you mean, it's not the same? I leaned forward, genuinely curious. Evidently, Merrick didn't realize that I was in the surveillance division and did precious little arresting myself, but I was too intrigued by his haunted look to bother correcting him. Forgive me, but you don't seem like a prudish guy. I coughed. I'm sure there must be lovely visions that appear from time to time on your feed. He replied to my winking suggestion with a laugh.
Oh, sure, the porn doesn't bother me. They're just harmless exhibitionists.
He dragged on his cigarette, expelled a cloud of smoke. The music filled the silence like a reverie.
But that's not what I'm talking about.
Rosette put her arm on his shoulder, and I saw that he was shuddering ever so slightly.
I mean, the looped videos of car wrecks with people rubbernecking for a better glimpse of a smoking vehicle's bloodied insides. The pictures of some unknown kid getting knifed by a bunch of thugs. The footage pulled from security cameras of freak accidents that end with a decapitation. Someone setting fire to some blindfolded guy while he's tied to... That's enough,
Rosette said.
I think Officer Conway understands.
She glanced at me, offered me a faint smile. I realized that she was just trying to reassure me that her fiancé was fine, but I could not help but enjoy the faint recognition of my dominance that her gesture implicitly recognized. I gave her a faint nod, my eyes holding her as I drew on the cold marble, tasting sweet air.
You can do something about what you see, Merrick said, his own gaze on me, as though he saw in me some simulacrum of inaccessible power. You can't understand the frustration and rage that builds in you, to see that ugliness and not possess any direct physical counter to it.
Perhaps I've never experienced it, but it's not unheard of, I said. There have been studies that have documented breakdowns such as your own. I believe a brilliant mind at Cambridge recently dubbed it the Sin Eater Syndrome. In passively taking on the ugliness of society, you simultaneously save society and are destroyed by it. I paused. So my question to you is this. Are you still able to work? Or do we need to set you to work elsewhere? There's a bookkeeping position down in District 7 that I think you'd be suited to. Merrick visibly cringed. He knew that there would be a substantial pay cut if he chose this option. Few wished to enter his line of work, but the monetary benefits were substantial. And if the man was truly serious about marrying Rosette, he could hardly afford to lose his position, or so I guessed. I was surprised then when Rosette herself suddenly spoke up and said to him,
"Darling, that sounds like a wonderful offer."
She glanced at me, adding,
"I was afraid that there were no positions open for the next cycle, but if there is an opening, that's wonderful news."
Merrick was shaking his head, though.
"It will not happen again,"
he said firmly.
"I've been seeing a therapist, a marvelous doctor downtown, and he's done wonders for my peace of mind. No, truly, Officer Conway, you have nothing to worry about. I'm still the man for the job."
"What's the name of this doctor?" I asked. Dr. Benway. I jotted the name down, sucking in the last of the rose-scented smoke. I then pressed a small button on the side of the cigarette, dissolving it to powder in my cupped hand, and blew the dust into the air. Okay, Merrick. I closed my notebook. I'll write up my report and send it to my superiors. Thank you for your forthrightness. I rose, shaking his hand and then Rosette's. As our fingers met, I saw her meet my eyes and shake her head slightly. She was still upset, I realized, that Merrick had not taken me up on my job offer. Merrick, could you go ahead and call us a cab? She asked. I'll be right out in a second. Her auburn hair shone violet under the lights of the Delphine Club as she watched Merrick go before turning to me again. I saw her eyes change from tender watchfulness to a more guarded, formal look, and I felt my insides twist at that alteration. What I would have given for it to be the reverse, and for her to look at that weakling as she now looked at me. But at least I knew that she recognized my strength, my authority. She was looking to me now for guidance and hope. Can you give him a week or so before dropping your offer? She asked. I'm not certain whether he has made the wisest decision. Perhaps, I said. I would suggest that you come by the precinct yourself. There are some things that I would like to question you about. Privately. She let me help her slip her coat on, let me press her shoulders, and said with a sigh, I'll see if I can get off work and see you. Her reply was as good as a no. Then she slipped away from me, into the rain. I lingered a bit longer, smoking another cigarette that I bummed from the bartender, listening to the soft drone of music, before returning to my place. Once I was there, I slipped into bed, turned down the lights, and settled the clear webbing of neurological implants about my head. Their vibrating pressure against my forehead sent me into a deep sleep, and according to the dream parameters that I'd programmed beforehand, the device began to flood my dreams with the sensory input that I'd wished for, that I had specified. I felt Rosette pressed breathlessly against me, watched her fumble with her buttons and hooks, and as I took her, I felt Merrick's tortured eyes upon us. That last element was necessary for my pleasure. I needed to imagine him feeling the torment of watching and not having before I could feel released from my own torment. And when at last I fell asleep with the dream web still vibrating and humming against my brow, feeling only a slight pang of what I had felt hours ago in the Delphine bar, when I had felt so strong, and yet so horribly powerless. A week went by, and then another, and Rosette did not drop by the precinct to see me. Did she take my lenience for granted? During breaks from my regular routine work, I thumbed through my notebook, running my eye over the scattered notes that I'd taken during my talk with Merrick. A nervous breakdown, the trauma of seeing images of violence without possessing the ability to physically respond, a new therapist named Benway. I felt like a bird circling a field for the shadow of my prey. And I was disappointed. Where I'd hoped to see a man unable to cope any longer with the pressures of his job, I saw a shaken but firm resolve. It didn't make sense. It didn't jive with what I'd read of Merrick in his file. I stayed late, far too late into the night in my office, drinking cup after cup of stale coffee until my mouth and throat took on a bitter, acrid flavor, scanning his file with jittery fingers for some clue. But I constantly came up dry. I pored over patterns in his social media profile, conversations picked up over security feeds, pictures of him as a nervous, handsome intern, a shy smile playing on his lips. The profile drawn up for him by a state physician had emphasized his propensity for guilt and a conscientious dutifulness. He was recommended for a job in security, and there he was. Outside my office, the precinct was lonely and dark, with a few guys operating the night shift at their desks, faces illumined from below by silver desk screens. Walls of text scrolled down the screens, informing them of various activities in different districts of New Londinium. A knifing on Lyle Street, a guy bludgeoning his mom to death with a Norwegian sex toy in a penthouse on 40th. The kind of stuff that Merrick had to watch and do nothing about. I imagined him watching and listening to the little cries and sobs, his brain firing, charging, and impotent. My overcoat couldn't keep the rain at bay, but I didn't mind the wetness, turning my steps away from the precinct and towards Trammell Street, where Merrick lived. The street lights glittered above like floating halos without an angel's head to touch them. I licked my lips and tasted rose smoke on my tongue. Was Rosette up there with him? Half of me hoped not. Hoped that she was running some evening errand. I wanted to watch the man by himself and see what I could discover. And part of me hoped so. Though I knew that what I saw would make me twist even more. Funny, when I'd been up for promotion and had lost my chance to a colleague with more luck than me, I had at first loathed the idea that I would have to spend another 2 years tapping a piece in my ear and listening to the same voices, the same human detritus, week after week, until something was said that would confirm or utterly deny some suspicion and put a case file at last to rest. I still loathed the work, but not for its dull routine. Now I loathed it for the occasional music that I had learned to hear in those crackling voices. I found his block, a row of tenements fashioned in that ugly brick and stone style that was so popular in this district, and found shelter behind a kiosk, trying to ignore the chatter of a watchmaker as he enthusiastically described his shining wares to a customer. I raised my wrist, pressing the dial on my wristband while touching my hidden earpiece. Like an invisible falcon, my device sent its message to the wire that I'd planted in Merrick's apartment, and after a crackling interference, I heard the sounds within. There were footsteps, the hum of an air conditioner. No voices, though. Nothing. He was alone. I was so intent on listening to Merrick's private movements that it was only when she had brushed against me accidentally, trying to pass me on the narrow sidewalk, that I recognized Rosette. I could imagine myself taking her in my arms, forcing her to recognize me, but it was myself that I forced when I stood steadfastly silent after that momentary brush, watching her walk through the rain away from me. She must have only just left his apartment then. I'd been so unmemorable to her, I realized that her glancing sweep of me had not been enough to remind her of who I was. She still had him, in her heart. "Hey, mister!" The watchmaker peered at me intently, rain dripping from the long brim of his cap. "You interested in any of this?" "Nothing you can give me." I opened the top button of my overcoat, flashing the silver insignia of sword and hand on my breast, and he backed away quickly, murmuring apologies. My wire in Merrick's apartment had suddenly gone silent. I tapped my earpiece, but heard nothing. For a moment I panicked and thought that he had found my wire, but then I saw the reason for the unexpected silence. Merrick was standing on the doorstep of his apartment, toying with a cigarette, his gaze idle and distant. His casual look infuriated me, but I forced myself to look away, afraid that he would recognize me. When I hazarded another glance at him, I saw that he was walking down the street towards the north end of the city, and of course I began to follow him. He took me deep into that district where all the factories and strip clubs seemed to cluster. The guts and slimy sinews of the city that I rarely saw on my off hours. One of the many vows that I'd been obliged to take before becoming an officer of the law had been a forswearing of all these pleasures. Not that I'd minded too much in the past. Cocaine and courtesans are overrated luxuries anyway. I never even felt the slightest twinge for erotic kicks until I'd seen Rosette's face in that file. Now, as I followed Merrick past the grinding factories and the driving, incessant music that seemed to emerge like a full-throated roar from the clubs that I passed, I wondered what else I was missing, what other tastes I had that lay dormant. Another thought occurred to me as I followed Merrick, as we walked together beneath neon light and intervening shadow. He was an officer of the law like me, albeit standing less tall on the pecking order. And, like me, if he entered any of these clubs with the purpose of doing anything more than watch, he was liable not only to lose his job, but to face severe punishment. What was it now? A minimum of 5 years incarceration with mandatory sensory training. They hook you up to a machine and fill you with endorphins while showing you videos of the court of justice pronouncing some edict, or a rocket ejecting from a launcher. One guy spent 10 years in this condition. I heard that every time he caught a transmission of the Prime Minister delivering a speech, he began blushing furiously like a schoolgirl and had to excuse himself. A really lovely way to live. Look, don't touch. Those were the rules. Oh, I was perfectly fine with this, I suppose, but perhaps Merrick wasn't. Perhaps this was how he worked off his excess energy after a day of watching pornography and homemade murder movies. I wasn't even thinking of what his superiors would think if they caught a whiff of this. I was thinking of how Rosette would react. And I have to own, I was smiling. But Merrick passed every one of them. The leather bars, the dance clubs, the brothels that fronted as used record stores. And I, following in his shadow, began to wonder what he was looking for. Was it something in the crowd? But the women in the plastic raincoats and tight skirts who leaned in to whisper something to him were met with less attention from him than from me, as I was too inexperienced to know how to rebuff them without tempting them. I met the gaze of one of them. One eye was dark, the other a startling green. It gave her an air of unreality. "Come with me?" She said it like a question. I noticed that in spite of her alien gaze, she was beautiful. Once I'd shaken them off me, I realized that I'd lost him. I returned to my apartment, shivering in the air conditioning as I unbuttoned the damp clothes from my body. A shower relaxed me somewhat,
But I still flinched when the memory of those fingers in the crowd reaching out and touching me returned, and the memory of how Merrick had so effortlessly lost me. I ran a hand over my cheeks, a week's growth of stubble. I'd really let myself go this last week in my white-hot need to find something on Merrick. I had to get a grip, had to return to what I used to be. This was madness. Barely bothering to towel myself dry, I opened the drawer in my nightstand by my bed and took out the floppy plastic of the dream web, shakily settling it against my forehead and over the crown of my skull. With trembling fingers, I began to program a different fantasy, one that I had never indulged in before. When I closed my eyes, I saw myself walking down those streets again, Merrick ahead of me. I saw him pause and approach one of the painted women who had pawed at me earlier. Saw him reach into his pocket, I suppose, for a credit. But when he withdrew his hand, I saw a gun, and he turned it on me, his face a leer of brutality. With lightning speed, I felt myself pull my own gun from its holster, while with my other hand I struck the weapon from his hand. Instantly his leer crumpled. Like a child he began to sob, stricken, while Rosette, who had suddenly emerged from the crowd, came to my side, utterly shocked by his dissolution. The dream ended as I embraced her. I was too shaken to program a more elaborate fantasy, and I came awake, shuddering and damp. I think I had fallen asleep for a good hour or so before I suddenly started awake again, my heart racing with a sudden, cold suspicion. Merrick said he was going to a therapist, a Dr. Benway. I threw my bedclothes aside and hunched over the glaring light of my computer screen, ran a few searches, but I couldn't find a single Benway in our database of authorized therapists. That name, though, there was some memory in me that it jogged. I entered it into a broader database, one that included the names of local shops, streets, and any other items of note in the district of New Londinium. When I saw the results, I realized that I had been a fool not to think of it before. There was only one place Merrick could have gone that would effectively evade street cameras and human eyewitnesses. The abandoned Dawson Corporation factory. Its address, 1583 Benway Street. The Dawson Corporation was, technically still is, a generally well-regarded company, purveyors of artificial intelligence in all its forms. They were the company who first perfected, back in 2060 I think it was, the first AI with a distinct personality, one that could innovate intelligently upon a user's request. I still remember when I was a kid how everyone wanted to have their own Dawson buddy, an AI who would actually carry on an intelligent conversation with you, make you feel like you were talking to a human who cared. I actually wasn't a huge fan of the things. It was bad enough to get beaten regularly at chess by an emotionless machine. If I wanted to get beaten by something that could tease me about it, I'd just go ahead and play with a fucking human. But I was in the minority. Most children loved them to pieces. Dawson catapulted to corporate fame not just because of their technical genius, but because of a brilliant campaign that linked robotic intelligence with children's development. Create the perfect companion for your children, one who fostered their social skills while meeting your approval. What more could a helicopter parent ask for? Guess I was lucky I was an orphan. It was when they started expanding to more adult pleasures that things began to take a more peculiar turn. In keeping with their earlier models for children, Dawson Corporation marketed their erotic robots with a savvy aggression and a simple concept: the thinking man's sex doll. Their
geisha models came in varying ethnicities and body types, and could hold in-depth conversations about Blade Runner, Frederick Jameson, and commodity fetishism. Hell, the company even acknowledged the tastelessness of the term geisha, incorporating self-deprecating jokes on Orientalism in their commercials, all of which seemed to satisfy the consciences of their target consumers, a mix of young middle-class professionals and wealthy dilettantes. The root of the problem with the geishas was in what the Dawson Corporation marketed as the soulmate algorithm. It was supposed to be an asset. You didn't have to program your own fantasy into the android the way I had to with the Dreamweb. Instead, the geisha was supposed to discern your fantasies from the data that it picked up in its interactions with you, what you said or hinted at in conversation, even subtle physical cues. And for most people, this was fine. Their hidden kinks, mildly disgusting or not, were satisfied and no harm done. But some of the surprises that the soulmate algorithm had in store for its users were not so harmless. Mind you, there couldn't have been any malicious intent on the part of the AI. The algorithm was simply interpreting the data it was given. There was something, the technicians insisted, that made the geisha models do what they did. But whatever it was, they couldn't discern. A week after the models were released, the police broke down the door of a man's apartment after his neighbors complained of an appalling stench, and found a smiling blonde geisha doll holding a nail gun in her stiff arms. The corpse of her owner, covered from head to toe in silver, bristling nails. Of course, the models were hastily recalled. No exceptions, the Court of Justice declared. No one understood what had gone wrong with the soulmate algorithm, and by the time the story of the geisha model and the nail gun hit the presses, no one wanted one of the things, never mind the legality. So the Dawson Corporation went back to making wholesome AIs for child rearing, and the factory where they built the geisha models was dismantled and abandoned. It had been scheduled for demolition, but it still had a few months of life left, so it remained on the edge of the city, a decrepit, lifeless factory of steel, plastic, and motionless, monstrous machinery. And it was also the one place within the walls of New Londinium that did not have operative security cameras. Hence my suspicion that Merrick might have chosen it as his rendezvous point for whatever clandestine mission had called him away at this late hour. As I drove in the direction of the abandoned Dawson factory, I found myself thinking about the geisha models and the soulmate algorithm. What had those dolls made of synthetic skin seen in us that made them think that we wanted that? Had they malfunctioned, or had they seen something too well? I thought of the crime scene photos, the dead man's wrists bristling with shining nails, and I felt my palms itch. The Dawson factory was surrounded by chain-link fences mounted with barbed wire. Beyond these artificial thorns, I saw its grey towers rise, framed by mist and starlight. Hefting a pistol and a flashlight, I approached, and after several minutes of cursory inspection, found what I had expected: a patch of the fence that had been savaged by pliers, leaving a dark, ragged opening. It was when I was about to crawl through into the darkness of the factory yard that I felt the cold press of something long and hard at the back of my head. "Drop the gun and the flashlight," Merrick whispered. "Now!" His voice was low and breathless, different from the way he had sounded in the Delphine bar. It
unnerved me, and so I obeyed him. "On your feet!" He gave my head a dizzying cuff. "How stupid do you think I am, Officer Conway? You didn't think I knew you were following me? That you've been following me for days?" I slowly stood, still facing the gap in the chain-link fence. After a moment's hesitation, I spoke, trying to deepen my voice, give it an air of the authority that I now felt so nakedly lacking. "Merrick," I cautioned, soft and earnest, "you could get in a lot of trouble for this. Now, give me the gun. I know this isn't personal." He laughed then, and I was alarmed to find that he didn't sound crazy in the slightest. "Of course not. But I can't let you go until I've convinced you that there's nothing worth being alarmed over." He gestured with his pistol towards the ragged gap in the fence. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to see what I've been doing. Isn't that what you've been wanting to learn my great secret?" I steeled my nerves, a bit shaken, I'll admit, by this unexpected turn and Merrick's peculiar mood, and forced myself to consider the situation calmly, to remember my training. I ignored the feel of the fence cutting and ripping into my coat and the probe of Merrick's gun at my back, and thought of my advantages. I wasn't handcuffed. I wasn't injured. I certainly wasn't dead. Merrick was a mousy man with an emotionally taxing desk job, suffering from PTSD. I was a trained officer. If I'd felt that he intended to shoot me in the factory yard, I could have risked retrieving my gun and made an end of the charade. The truth was that in spite of my shock and reservation, I also felt a sharp dig of curiosity. Merrick wanted to show me something in that darkness, perhaps the thing that had at last quieted his fears. Who was I to stop him? As we passed beneath the shadow of the tower and reached the tall door leading to the factory warehouse, Merrick said, and I could hear the smile behind his words, "Funny, isn't it? Ordinarily, you would expect me to be leading you to something horrific, but I'm actually going to show you what I've managed to find to compose my fears, to relieve them. Does that strike you as anticlimactic, officer?" "It depends," I replied, "on whether your relief is obtained through legal means." "Right," he chuckled. "Relief isn't just relief, is it?" The first thing that struck me as we entered the musty confines of the factory was how thick and cloying the smell of plastic was. The door had opened onto a narrow, windowless stairwell, and as I blinked, my vision adjusting to the dim light that Merrick's flashlight provided, I saw the sprawled forms of several geishas, glassy eyes, motionless and staring. They were as harmless as mannequins without their energy packs, but I still instinctively recoiled from them. They were too lifelike to be mistaken for dolls. They were like still living humans, inhumanly motionless, frozen in time and space. Couldn't the company have cleaned the place up before cleaning out and torched these human simulacra, these changelings, to ashes? Merrick prodded me in the back with his pistol, and I tore my gaze away from those smiling, painted lips and began to climb the stairs leading higher into the darkness of the factory tower. Our ascension was silent. I didn't feel that it would be prudent to question him in that pressing stillness with his gun at my back, and he kept his own peculiar peace. By the time we reached the topmost floor, we had climbed a good 10 stories, and I was breathless, panting in the concrete gloom. "Don't worry," he said. "It's cooler up here. You'll see."
He opened the door that led to the 10th floor, and I felt a rush of air against my face like a breeze from the sea. But it wasn't the sea. My voice echoed like the cry of a lost bird. Jesus Christ! Merrick, what are you doing up here? The Sin Eater, or Do You Feel Like I Feel, by Colin Harker. Join us next episode for the conclusion of this 2-part presentation. Apologies, gentle listener, we didn't warn you that this was a 2-parter, did we? Well, our Patreon subscribers were in the know, but for everyone else, we hope you'll excuse this cheeky omission. Have no fear, our denouement is on the way in episode 224. Stay tuned. Thank you to all the authors who submitted works to us over our brief hiatus. We'll be sharing some of these with you lucky listeners in the not-too-distant future. If you are a creator of dark tales and have something up your sleeve you'd like to share with the Nocturnal Transmissions listenership, please don't hesitate to send it in. We treat all submissions with respect. And when one happens to ignite the dark spark of inspiration, we give it our all. And speaking of giving, we have been looking forward to giving a warm welcome to our new acolytes who've joined the ranks of our Patreon subscribers over the last few weeks. Robert DeChiavi, Colin Groob, Dave Baxter, Danielle O'Connor, Pat, and Shrub. Welcome. And that brings us to the end of our first episode of the year. A big thank you to our Patreon subscribers, and an even bigger thank you to those in that number who don the mantle. Cohort, our true believers. Fangora Brown, Kel Wielden, Tim Howard, Alex Brewers, Jimmy Mack, Boole Swivney, Rebecca Gates, Doug Standish, Drenny, Evan Dooley, Amanda Moore, Heathen Soul, Jerry Taylor, Rachel Brown, Johnny Kelly, Robert Troy Hampton Peterson, Daniel Kamiankowski, Tippy Polo, and Wayne Prince. You have been listening to Nocturnal Transmissions, the podcast that celebrates dark tales, both old and new, produced and performed by your humble narrator, Kristin Holland. Thank you and good night, gentle